Welcome to Co-Creating Now with Monica Goyle. Monica is a spiritual counselor and healer with a life purpose to put people in touch with their innate healing abilities, empowering them to live a life full of joy, love, peace, and abundance. Through this show, you'll learn to heal every aspect of your life by connecting to your higher self. And now your host, Monica Goyle, on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Co-creating now. Hope you're doing well and having a fabulous life. Here we have a very special guest today, Veronica Lee, who is a metaphysical teacher, a healer, spiritual guide, and intuitive. And she has been practicing spirituality, intuitive perception, meditation, and manifesting through visualization since she was a child. And here we are very grateful for her to be here on our show together. Welcome, Veronica. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Monica. I'm excited to be with you today.
That's great. So, Veronica, we'll start with your introduction. I know lot of listeners know you, but for our new listeners, please share with us what life changes or what incidents, what was it that triggered you to be on the spiritual path or where you are in your journey today?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's interesting because many times we come to this place in our lives of spiritual seeking through crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And in my case, that was pretty much on the money. In other words, yes, I was raised metaphysically. Yes, this was all very natural to me.
Mm-hmm.
But in my desire to fit in, to be part of, what everybody else was doing, I somewhat wanted to disconnect, let's say, from
Mm-hmm.
my strange and weird background and be somewhat normal and just have children. And as that journey was moving along really well, because of course I was very good at manifesting and I was, very clear about what I wanted, which was to be a mom. It felt like, okay, everything's just great and here we go. And then suddenly my life started to fall apart. And in that falling apart, I had to really look at, so-called what was I not doing correctly? In other words, if I was, able to manifest well, if I was able to, call upon, my higher power to bring me, that which I really wanted, I would not have wanted things to go the way that they were going, which was, a very painful period in my life. And one of the things that ended up happening was I went to a therapist, because things weren't going so well. And she was also an intuitive, and she basically saw me for the first time. I had really been deeply seen and said, you are a teacher, you're here, you're bringing all these gifts. And so why don't you do that? And
so
at that point,
sorry.
Go ahead. I was at that point, I wasn't exactly sure what she was talking about, but it resonated. And so from that point, it was a conscious exploration of, why am I here? What am I bringing? Who am I? And from there, I started working as an intuitive myself. And of course, in some way, shape, or form, offering the same sort of insights to most of my clients. As they show up to me, they're often looking for themselves to be seen as well.
That's awesome. So Veronica, like you said, you had a metaphysical upbringing. So your parents were, they were intuitives or were guiding you spiritually?
So what it is my parents were very young. And so my mom was 15 when she married my dad. And, within a year, so actually on their first anniversary, at 16, she gave birth to me. And that marriage did not last very
Mm-hmm.
long. And so my mom did go back to college. And while she was in college, she actually met a metaphysician. And the woman who she met became sort of our family psychic and, counselor, so
Uh-huh.
called. And so my mom was attending, and I was probably 3 at the time. My mom was 19 or
Oh,
so.
wow. So you were
And
very young.
yes, and so she started going to these meditation groups, and I remember being and the woman's name was Mary, and I remember being at Mary's house and people holding their hands over another, other people trying
Mm-hmm.
to bring them energy and healing, and and just being part of that from the very beginning as well. My mom taught me about visualization. So if I would be not feeling well, let's say I had a sore throat, she
Mm-hmm.
would do it in a very childlike, fun way. She'd
Oh,
say,
wow.
"Okay, so what's in your throat?" And if I imagined my throat was yucky and dark with spiders, then she'd say, "Okay, go in there and you can imagine, going and taking a bow and arrow and and getting all those bugs out of there." And so at a very young age, I was able to learn these skills
Wow.
and play in that sort of mystical realm. I
Actually,
re-
that's a great way of teaching all our children to help themselves.
exactly, and it was really it was so natural. When you're a
Mm-hmm.
child, everything is just so natural. I think where it started to become uncomfortable for me is as I started to mature and go out into, the real world,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak, as I was up against, my childhood friends who were going, what is that? What are you talking about? And, oh, you're not Christian. And I wasn't really brought up Christian, and I wasn't really brought up anything
Yeah.
in particular. It was more spiritual than anything religious.
Mm-hmm.
And given that it was the 70s, it was a little bit uncomfortable for other people.
Hmm.
So in my efforts to be more normal, and as I of course hit my teens, I did want to start like sheltering that part of me a
Hmm.
little bit more. But interestingly enough, in high school, as I really got into my teens, I remember, loving, Stairway to
Hmm.
Heaven. First of all, I loved Led Zeppelin, but, the lyrics for Stairway to Heaven were just so perfect. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're so awake, this band, they're talking about these other things. And
Yeah.
and so that was exciting, and some of my friends shared that interest. And so I remember spending a weekend reading Jonathan Livingston Seagull and Illusions with my friends and just
Mm-hmm.
going, wow, my mom had been trying to get me to read it for years.
Yeah.
So anyway, so there was that, epiphany again in my high school years. But as I went on to college, it was again in a college town, a much more intellectual environment
Mm-hmm.
where spirituality was sort of, for those who weren't smart enough, let's say, to know better,
Yeah.
and so again, just wanting to fit in, it was sort of like, this isn't that important.
Yeah. I know. I can totally relate with that. And I know it's like we get lost in this real world, not knowing, what is real. I mean, we know, but then we are
Yes,
lost and we want to fit in.
exactly.
Yeah. So I have a question, Veronica, and a lot of children today are coming from a higher plane and
Yes,
they are very spiritual. Like you said, in 70s there were not as many kids born with that. But I
right.
think now I see a lot of kids questioning and they are coming with this wisdom. But again, to fit in, they close themselves. They shut their
Exactly.
third eye off. And I have, my older one is 9 years old, and these days he's he's been very restless. It's very interesting when he says, "I feel I don't belong here." And
Yeah.
what are my lessons? Why am I here? I just feel very restless. And being a mom, and I totally understand where he is coming from. But then can you share how I can, or how other moms who have similar children with such deep questions and feel they don't fit in? How can we help them?
Yeah. So I would say two things to that. The first would be to acknowledge who they are on a very much a soul level as you are, and just say yes. Yes,
Yes.
you're a very awake person, and at the same time acknowledge that humanness that is struggling. So there's this sort of paradox in essence. All of my children were, of course, had some experiences with my stepping really into my intuitive nature and stepping it and claiming it more publicly, let's say. My oldest, I actually was trying to still keep that metaphysical part of me a little bit at bay, because I felt so strange and weird growing up. I didn't want her to feel weird. So I kind of kept it a little bit more benign, let's say. By the time my second, and my children are only a few years apart from each other, but when with my second one, I started really delving into this work when he was, around second or third grade. So he was a lot younger, and he was struggling with some issues in school, just having a hard time reading.
Yeah.
And I actually pulled him out of school for a year and pretty much unschooled him during that year. And during that time, he really got fascinated with the whole a mystical realm. And we ended up, he actually, in his own, saving of money, bought himself several crystal balls. And he asked me, how do I read these? And I said, I don't know. Why don't you look at the ball and see what comes to you? And so, in other words, I was guiding him, but I was also guiding him to experiment and play and experience what was coming up with him. So what I would say, in essence, with your son and with those who are really being faced with these children who are asking deeper, more profound questions, is to really hold space for them as themselves being somewhat of a master in a child's body, but also a child, in essence, in this big world. So in other words, we do definitely want to acknowledge what they know and have this bigger piece and say it's there, and maybe give them some tools to access their inner knowing or their power, whether it's...
The truth is, you can't change the world if you're broke. I know, I've tried. Isn't it time you turned your life's calling into a profitable, freedom-based business? I'm Michelle Barr. Join me every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern for Sacred Success.
Simone Milasas would like you to know that business can be fun, which is why she wrote the book, Joy of Business. What if you could have the joy of business rather than the stress and struggle? Most of the time, the only thing stopping you from a thriving business is you. In the Joy of Business book, Simone gives you access consciousness tools and pragmatic ways to get out of your own way and to create the business, life, and living you know is possible and beyond what this reality says is achievable. Business is joy. It's creation. It's generative. It can be the adventure of living. You can purchase your copy of the book through Amazon or Joy of Business website, www.accessjoyofbusiness.com. Host your show on IOM-FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM-FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community.
Do you have time to read that inspiring book or that blog post you've been meaning to get to? In your busy world, how do you improve yourself and keep your life going? I'm Lisa Kay, and my Between Heaven and Earth radio show can transform your life just by listening. Be uplifted with inspiring topics, positive stories, and ideas that really work. Between Heaven and Earth radio is conscious living for your soul, every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.
The future of Internet radio is here. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM.
Welcome back, Veronica.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
So we were talking about how to help our children And that's great, just allow them to be themselves and let them know they what they are thinking is right, and they should continue with their search and the answers they are seeking, and just encourage and gently guide them to have their own experiences.
Exactly. And also to really honor when they need to be very human. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, I jokingly tell this story. Growing up metaphysically, in essence, in this background, having, to always visualize myself getting well.
Mm-hmm.
I jokingly say, there were times I would be like, can I just have chicken soup like all the other kids? In other words, there were parts of me that just really wanted to be mothered and tenderly
Yeah.
nurtured, and to be human and to be frail. And so with my own children, my son is now 17, and he is not interested in crystal balls at this point, and he is not interested in anything from these other realms at
Right.
all. And so just to really honor that too, and
Mm-hmm.
to let him explore what he's exploring now, which is oh, I have a girlfriend, I want to get a car, I'm really into weightlifting, and he's
Mm-hmm.
interested in possibly joining the FBI later. So just
Yeah.
enjoying his phase now, rather than saying, oh, what happened to my sweet innocent little boy who wanted to read crystal balls. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really, it's all the same. It's the same child experiencing a new phase of his own development. So really honoring that as well.
That's a great advice. So many times I have to share with you when I see my child doing, all the boy fun, boy stuff, a little boy fun, and I'm like, what happened to you today? So,
Yes, I will say one of my first readings that I had done, and I've been working intuitively in this specific way, professionally, like it was a conscious effort to say, okay, I'm going to do this now, for over 10 years. And I
mhm.
remember that one of my first clients, she had asked me about her son who wanted to join the Army. And I was taking a look at that, and I remember her statement. And at the time, 10 years ago, my boy was only 6 or 7.
Mhm.
And she said, I just don't understand. She goes, I gave birth to him in my backyard under a tree. Why would he join the Army? And I just had to, and I remember just thinking, oh no, because I had also, given birth to my son at home, and
Yeah.
had raised him without a television and all of this. And yet here my boy is, looking at, like I said, joining the FBI, and very much into airsoft, except for,
Yeah.
now it's not as often as it was. But yes, there's that part of him that wants to experience,
Sure.
what does it mean to be a boy? What does it mean to have this adrenaline and this testosterone going through my body? What does it
Mhm.
mean to be a protector?
Yeah.
What does it mean to become a man? And to really, again, just hold space for that, to be very human.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, Veronica. And we all have gone through this, right? I mean, as a child, we were so tuned in, and during the high school and college years, we all felt lost, but still we did our things.
Exactly.
And then when we
Yes.
realized, we came back.
Exactly. And the thing is, one of the things that I find is that if we were so on, let's say we knew what we wanted to do and we just
Mm-hmm.
started to do it, there is this part of us that would feel somewhat disconnected from the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen this again from my very awake clients, and there's no judgment, but there are people who have really come in very awake and have had a very awake experience,
Mm-hmm.
but have felt very disconnected, not necessarily to the earth, but to the experience of the people on the earth,
Mm-hmm.
to not really understand, let's say what struggle is, or what poverty is, or what heartache is, or what passion is, in very human ways,
Mm-hmm.
and so here, the majority of people are trying to so-called ascend to these higher realms of consciousness.
Yeah.
And yet, as one woman pointed out to me, because I am so awake, she said, you are so much in oneness, you are so much in oneness that oneness wanted to experience singularity. And that's why that's just as rich of an experience for the oneness to have this singularity that says, it's only me, I'm all alone, I know nothing, as it is for those of us who feel all this, I know nothing, I'm just a single person and, disconnected from source,
Yeah.
to suddenly experience oneness, right? So those are equally valuable and valid. And so that helps me soften into this human form as well.
Mm-hmm. That's so beautiful. I mean, yeah, you said it with so much ease, but it totally makes sense. That's great. So, Veronica, you said some life experiences then made you realize that you are attracting those things because you are not that your energy is projecting that basically. That's your own projection.
Yes, it's interesting because I was raised with these notions that we create our reality. I've
Mm-hmm.
really played with this and looked at this deeply because especially when my life didn't go according to plan, I had to wonder, how did I mess this up? Because again, as humans who are raised in this consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
we tend to think of everything in a very dualistic way. We tend to think of everything as, I'm, good or bad, wrong or right.
Right.
And even with all of this expanded information growing up and looking at it, it was still taught to me somewhat narrow-minded, but I also took it in that way.
Mm-hmm.
So when things weren't, going my way, so to speak, it was very easy for me to suddenly blame myself and say, how am I creating this? How did I, mess up my life? And in my personal experience, I basically, I jokingly again tell the story of having manifested my husband. Literally,
Mm-hmm.
when I was 16 or 17, I wrote down, my perfect guy and I
Wow.
described him. And then, of course, I met him a few years later and he was my husband. And we've been together 28 years. But part of what fell
Oh,
apart
beautiful.
was our marriage really fell apart because he ended up really struggling with his own inner dark side.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't understand, how did I create that? This was not even me having this emotional issue. It was
Yeah.
him. So I'm thinking, how did I contribute? How did I create this? And part of me couldn't even understand it. And the other
Yeah.
part of me, was in such emotional turmoil that I couldn't take it in anyway. And so again, I don't want to even say it was his fault or there was any blame,
Mm-hmm.
but it was hard for me to not go into blame in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I do see, though, is that if we start to look at creating reality really coming from a very high, frequency,
Mm-hmm.
then it's not always conscious. So in other words, this crisis happened to bring me back into who I truly am, right? And if I had, let's say, stayed on the path to be who I truly am, let's say I would have, gone off and said, okay, I don't want to, go to school for design and, go off into this, mainstream world. Let's, kind of create that little picture over
Mm-hmm.
there. If I had stayed and nurtured, and really cultivated who I truly am, would I have hit the crisis to find who I truly am? Or did I need that crisis to somehow provoke me? Both of them, again, are valid, but rather than seeing it as I created this,
Mm-hmm.
it could have been my highest soul, was setting up some obstacles so I could really come back to who I am. So it's a lot more complex than just visualization. In other words, what I
Sure.
also see is that when the more awake someone becomes, they hit this point in which visualization and mantras and all of those things don't even work anymore. So what happens is,
Interesting.
as you become more conscious, you're able to create from these higher realms, but you don't necessarily have access to it, and you haven't necessarily connected the dots to know how to pull from that. So is that making sense? I know it's a little bit convoluted, but is that kind of giving you a little picture?
It is, Veronica, but I mean, of course, would like to know more if you can elaborate on that, because there are so many people, so many couples struggling right now when one partner is truly, I mean, everyone is spiritual, but it's just that one partner is practicing spirituality and all these spiritual tools, but the other is not, and there are often these clashes. So it's, it's beautiful you brought it up that you experienced those obstacles, those blocks in your own marriage. So what do you, would love to have your guidance,
Yeah. So what I see is even with two people who are highly spiritual and who are practicing spirituality, a lot of times, their struggle, because it's really not about whether someone's so-called spiritual or not. It's really about, what did my soul want me to experience in this life, and how is it playing out? One of the most, I would say, heartening, it was just like, thankfully I don't have to so-called blame myself anymore. That happened with my husband is, I have an amazing friend who is a numerologist and an astrologer, and I refer a lot of people to him. And I remember, when my husband was still kind of in his darkness, and we had literally separated for 6 years. We didn't live together, but, we stayed connected, and he was very much parenting the children and such. So anyway, we ended up going to see my friend, and he's a couple of hours drive away, and we went up for the day. And he laid out my husband's chart, and he said, he said, your soul wanted to experience the darkest of the dark.
Oh, wow.
And then he said, congratulations, you've done that, and so we both kind of laughed, but it was also this sort of relief that this wasn't conscious, that my husband said, gee, I'm going to go over here and flip out and really just have some dark episodes. It wasn't a conscious thought. It wasn't necessarily even his upbringing, that he was raised by a father and a mother who were this perfect family, but his dad happened to be a drinker and they never let feelings expressed. None of that. This was really in his chart. This was in his being.
I think we will be back after a short break.
Okay.
Bringing you the best of the conscious minds in the world. OMTimes Radio, your conscious lifestyle on steroids.
Hello, I'm Miriam Knight of New Consciousness Review, inviting you to my new show where I interview the rising stars of the conscious awakening. We'll explore the many faces of consciousness in action and intriguing perspectives on life, the universe, and everything in between. Join us each Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern on the Rising Stars Show.
Are you trying to get from point A to point B and need a little advice? Connect with the counselors at OMTimes Advisors. Whether you're looking for a life coach or a spiritual intuitive, the advisors participating at advisors.omtimes.com were carefully chosen based on their gifts, skills, and professionalism. OMTimes Advisors, connecting you with the best advisors in the business. Being a radio host on IOM-FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
Imagine receiving healing, vibration-raising energy as you listen to the radio, energy that flows effortlessly to you. Imagine exploring all things metaphysical, sharing in an ongoing adventure. Join me, Karen Smoot, along with my co-hosts Lisa Victorson and Wendy Weber for Immersion into Source, every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on OM Radio.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Welcome back, Veronica. Welcome back, listeners. So we were talking about, Veronica was sharing about her own marriage and the struggle that, as couples we go through, about the life lessons or the soul lessons that we need to learn, or soul experiences soul contracts that we sign up for without knowing.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. And so what happens is we often do this all, like you said, it's a soul contract. We plan this pre-birth and then we forget and then we get into it and go, ruh-roh. What was I thinking? And then we have to, find our way back.
Mm-hmm. So that's great. So both of you were patient, and of course, there was so much love, and I know in all the relationships there is, but we get so lost, as you said, we all forget what we signed up for.
Yes.
What do you have to say about that? Isn't that, I feel, okay, we signed up some contracts before we were born, and we are here to learn those lessons and, fulfill certain commitments, but we forget. I mean, isn't that unfair?
It is. And one of the things I will say is that, again, with my upbringing, I did also learn that same concept that we are here to learn lessons, and that we are sort of going through these different levels of consciousness to learn. I don't necessarily get that we have to learn anything. Mm-hmm. What I see is that it's purely experiential, and I don't want to sound so neutral, but one of the things that really hit me hard was several years ago in 2006, one of my cousins, who was actually more of a brother to me, both of our moms were young moms. They were both, 16 when they had us, his mom was probably 17 or 18 because he's the second born, but nonetheless. And so since our moms were sisters and very young, and we often lived together. So in 2006, unfortunately, my cousin committed suicide. And when he did, I remember being so angry and so devastated and screaming when I found out the news. And, over the next few days, really just, being with him and helping him, shift into his higher form. And one of the things that I remember asking was, what is the point? What is the point? What is the point of life? It was so devastating to me. And I was just given this picture and this knowing that it was almost as if you imagine the point as being almost like a portal or a little tiny hole. And all we have to do is go through that. It's simply for the experience. It was purely neutral. There was no higher learning. I mean, what higher learning was my cousin to have, or what am I to have in this experience? We can gain, something from it, just as if you're walking through a field of flowers and you could just tromp through and not notice any of it. Or you can notice that, oh, the birds are singing. Oh, the grass is so soft. I'm smelling lavender. Isn't this lovely? So you can really take in the experience, and then you can say, oh, look, I want to go ahead and, collect some of this lavender, dry it out, and do something with it. But you don't have to. You could simply, barrel through that field and completely just go through it and not have anything valuable come from it, right? So the value is really an option, and it's something that we can, take in if we choose to, but it's not a have to. And so, yeah, it's a little bit strange. I think what I see on a global picture, on a larger collective picture, is that if we do want to have a sense of point, what I'm seeing with my clients and such is that most people who are highly awake, who have incarnated at this time, really did have an intention. And what they wanted to do was to really come in and experience not just the human form, but the human form with a very expanded consciousness. So they wanted to bring their full selves in. They wanted to bring their universal selves in, and to even bring in energies from other consciousnesses and from other realms, let's say, into this experience. So really tapping into their higher spiritual gifts into this planet here and now. So that's what I'm seeing, so many people coming in terms of their purpose right now on this planet.
That's, yeah, I mean, that definitely makes sense. But then, could you tell us a little bit about this theory of karma?
Yes. So karma, to me, is an interesting dynamic. Well, how I see karma is it's more of, how do I want to describe it? It's more of intention. So, for example, if my intention was to come in and to experience, all of my power, to experience my gifts, and I don't do that, then that could be a way I could describe karma. So, for example, it's sort of like an evaluation. And again, I don't want to bring it to this level of learning because it sort of minimizes it, but it's something that people understand. So, for example, if my intention was to really experience a more expanded me, and I didn't experience that expanded me, then it would be like, do I want another opportunity to do that or not? So it would be kind of like, darn it, I didn't quite do what I wanted to do. Let's try that again. And then we can try that again. But it's, again, not a have to. I think it's so much easier, again, for a dualistic, I would say a dualistic, reality to really see things in such a positive, negative way, and to see it as, if you do this, it gets balanced out with that. And again, that's an option, but I don't see it as a have to.
Oh, so it's the soul's choice if they want to come back.
Exactly.
Okay. So I mean, as we all understand it, as people understand it, that if you are doing good, then you don't need to come back because you are evolved and you have learned your lessons. But if you are harming people, or you are, not doing good, then because you haven't evolved or haven't learned your lessons, you have to keep coming back.
That's how most people see karma, and see, that's just sort of insinuating that there's someone evaluating and deciding that other than self. And really, it's self who gets to decide. And if you go back to oneness, we are all that self. We are all in that place of oneness where it really is sort of irrelevant. Because if we are all one, then it's much harder to say, well, my right hand punched my left hand, and therefore my right hand should be punished, right? It's sort of irrelevant because it's all the one of the body, let's say. But that doesn't mean that the right hand should be punching the left hand until it beats it to nothing, but it also doesn't do justice by turning it back around. It's really learning to be more in harmony so that no harm has to ever be done, that it could be a matter of learning to just love the entire essence of my body, my wholeness in that way, because I want to, because it feels better, because it resonates at a higher frequency. If we could all start learning to be in this higher state of love consciousness, then we can start to see it played out more readily on the earth plane. But again, it's not a have to, and it also isn't really dependent on someone else to do something or not do something to have us personally experience our own joy.
That's so beautiful. That's really beautiful. I think lot of us always want to know, it's not something that we are judged on. No one is judging us. It's just for our own growth, for our own evolution, and so we can feel that love, that peace that we are. We are part of that peace, that love.
Exactly. Because that feels better, and the experience is more joyful when we have that. When we get to experience the joy, it's like, yes, this is that place in me that resonates so high and so lovingly, and I like that experience.
Wonderful. That's so beautiful. Thank you so much. So, Veronica, we were talking about how you again, got back questioning, going deeper into yourself. And I know you shared with us what came up. We all have, our soul contracts. But could you please share some tools with us, when we are lost, how to bring ourselves back?
Yes. So really, we all have come in awake. And if you think about it, sure, that level of awakeness might be slightly different from one being to another. And it's simply a matter of how much that soul chose to distance itself from its true self, right? Let's say, a soul came in, not because it was less evolved, but it's because it wanted to say, hey, what would it be like to be really asleep? What would that feel like to have my consciousness be so darkened that I only see black and white, that I only have these really minimalistic, almost angry experiences? Let's just see. Well, in order to do that, many times, you would want to set an environment that would give you that experience. So when we incarnate, we will often experience an environment and have a setup that will help create that with us. So if you wanted to experience what it's like to live in poverty, it would be most easily to get what you want by going into an environment, by being birthed into a family where there was poverty. That would be the easiest way. That doesn't mean you can't do it other ways. So we will often have these situations in which there's abuse and hardship and such, so that we can really experience that. But in essence, there's still that human part that is not as strong as our soul. So when we are little, in spite of the abuse, in spite of the the messed up environment that we might have been raised in, and not to say everybody is at all, but I'm just giving a picture that even in that, when we are young, we often feel our true selves.
That's so true. And when we come back, we will work on it.
Feed your soul with waves of consciousness on OMTimes Radio.
Hi, this is Angela Levesque, host of Entanglement Radio. Join me Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern for inspiring conversations with visionaries in spiritual science and conscious healing. Entanglement Radio, Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern. Transcendent talk for the conscious mind.
As difficult as it is to believe, there are places in Africa where human traffickers sell albino children and their body parts for use in magic rituals. Humanity Healing International is actively working in Uganda to change this paradigm. The Albino Rescue Project finds albino children who are at risk and places them in safe schools and environments where they can learn and grow free from fear. To learn more or to sponsor a child, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is. Host your show on IOM-FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM-FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community.
Live with medium Lisa Phoenix, Mediumship Messages and Musings, explores mediumship and all things metaphysical. Lisa Phoenix invites you to reach above and beyond your everyday experiences, to explore new dimensions in the spirit world. She will do live readings to connect callers to their loved ones in spirit, shares engaging stories and teachings from her own personal experience, and will have intriguing conversations with other mediums, spiritual teachers, and healers to help you understand the metaphysical world so you can connect to these forces in your day-to-day life. Join your host on this magical and metaphysical journey into the world of spirit every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time.
Bringing a more conscious lifestyle to your world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
So we were talking about rediscovering ourselves.
Yes. And so, when we're little, around 8 or 9, there's this part of us that really wants something. So what I invite, clients to do many times, and usually this is more or less in a class kind of group experience, but to go back and imagine, what is it that you really wanted? What is it that you wanted to be? What were your things that brought you joy when you were around, 7, 8, 9? And for me in particular, I so loved this whole magical experience. My favorite show was, Bewitched, and I had a black cat, and I named the cat Familiar, and anything magical was just so endearing and exciting to me. And then lo and behold, here I am in this work that really opens up to these other realms. So that's one thing. The other is that as we are hitting this age, whatever that age may be, now for many people, it'll often be, let's say, in their 40s, what we might call our midlife crisis. If we look at this, what is it that we really want? What I find is many people won't even know what that is. They've gotten so caught up in their have-tos. I have to work. I have to support my family. I have to. And if we could, practice just releasing that, whether it's just in a fantasy, for example, if they, like they often talk about creating little vision boards. If someone allows themselves to create a vision board, not because they suddenly are going to have these goals or they're going to have to visualize it, but it'll open up their heart and their desires again for what they really want. It'll give them a picture of what's important to them. The other is that for those who are very disconnected, if they can't see themselves, perhaps they find someone else who can. So it could be, their friends, but many times our friends are going to be exactly where we are kind of stuck, in that world. But it could also be through some kind of spiritual counselor. So, for example, whether it's an astrologist or somebody who does readings, to really look at them from a different angle to say, gee, here's what you really want. Here's what your soul wanted to experience in this life. So what I see in people are their gifts, are what their soul wants, and what they are sort of up against now that will help them move into that direction. And I have to be fully honest that our gifts are so powerful and so wanting to come through right now as a collective. And at the same time, it's not necessarily easy to get there. And I think that one of the sides about the whole metaphysical realm is that, or at least the teachings, is that if we just, create a vision board, or if we say enough affirmations, it'll all happen. And meanwhile, we can go back to our everyday lives. And I don't see it that way. I see that generally speaking, we have to really decide and to take conscious steps, sort of like losing weight. Sure, maybe there are people out there who could easily lose weight. All they have to do is, have one, healthy drink and they're on their way. My son's one of those, kids, he's got 5% body fat and he doesn't even like food, but at the same time, for someone who has, let's say, lost their body shape, has really gotten far from their original natural frame, maybe they have to do a little bit more work to get there. And so really, it's a matter of desire and shifting back into that willingness to say, I'm ready to own who I am. I'm ready to start taking on these aspects of myself that have been forgotten.
But Veronica, like you said, whenever we realize that, whenever we, discover who we are and what we want to do, and you said it's not easy. So many times, the financial worries and limitations come in our way. And it's really hard to overcome them because it's not just us, but a lot of other lives depend on that.
Yes.
So how do we overcome that? How do we get past that block? Because once we are ourselves, I know we can attract anything.
Yeah. So that is like the question, isn't it? That's like one of the most, I would say, challenging obstacles that we have, whether we have very little or we have a lot. Because with my clients, what I have found is even when they have a lot, they don't see themselves as having much. And in fact, a lot of times the more they have, the harder they have a time releasing that hold on to their financial security. So they get more into, well, my retirement, or, I'm really used to this kind of a lifestyle, or, gee, I've got to keep this house. To be honest with you, my family lives on very little. And it's not by conscious choice that, gee, I really want to struggle and have a hard time financially. It's that I have chosen to really pull out of the mainstream system as much as I can. And it's pretty difficult still. In other words, I would rather stay true to myself and deal with the obstacles that come at me this way than to lose myself and deal with the obstacles that come from that. Because either way, if your soul is trying to wake up and trying to connect into who you truly are, it's going to happen whether you have money or not. Now, you may think it'll be easier to have money as you do so, and it is, but I've also seen it can be very difficult because people either get so stressed about walking away from, their, security in some way, or that they have so many options to delay their awakening because there's no sandpaper rubbing up against them. There's no harshness in their life that says something has to change.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if they get very comfortable and they have, plenty of money, or maybe they're married to somebody who makes plenty of money, and part of their stepping into themselves really needs to be a little bit more direct. If it's delayed because they're comfortable, then it's going to just be that much harder in essence. So it doesn't mean that we have to struggle. I'm not implying that at all. What I'm saying is it's not going to happen just by wishing it away or visualizing it away. It's again, the analogy of losing weight is that there has to be not just, what we start doing and taking care of our body, in terms of, are we eating well? Are we, reducing the calories? Are we eating emotionally, or are we learning to just eat because it's sustaining us?
Right.
And then are we moving our bodies in a way that feels really yummy? And I'm not saying, again, to kill themselves and, go on a show like I don't even have a TV, but like that show where they're trying to all lose weight or anything like that. It doesn't have to be that extreme. And at the same time, there are plenty of people out there who are willing to support someone, and it doesn't even have to cost a lot of money. There are lots of resources out there that are very little cost or free even. So yeah, it's an obstacle. But if you think about it from a larger perspective, again, wouldn't that be sort of a fun, let's say collective challenge to say, gee, will I find myself in spite of all of these obstacles? And I believe that we can.
Yeah, I mean, you are absolutely right. I mean, these are the choices that we make. We make a choice of not listening to our inner voice, just because we will be uncomfortable. But are we really comfortable following the same path? I guess not.
Yeah, and there's a difference between being somewhat comfortable and being in bliss and being in joy. And really what I try to challenge people to do is to really step into their joy. And even though, yes, there are times I scrape across the bottom and I go, oh my gosh, and I have my little meltdowns because I can't afford something, I still, generally speaking, each day live in joy. The choices that I've made support my joyful living. Just last week, again, going back to my son, he literally bit through his lip the other day, and we don't have health insurance, and I actually can't really afford, Obamacare, and I it's one of those things that I haven't had insurance for so many years since after my twins were born.
Mm-hmm.
But part of it was because I don't use a lot of medical, intervention at all. I really don't. And part of it was we simply couldn't afford it. And even with the Obamacare, it's like, okay, I can't quite afford it. And so I was freaking out. I was like, okay, how am I going to get my boys, lip stitch when I don't have anything, to pay for this? How is this going to happen? And yet it all came together in the end, after hours of stressing, and I took him into a little doctor place. And of course I had to pay up front, and I didn't know where I was going to get the cash to pay him. And it all worked out, and he got his 2 stitches. But what was really exciting is that I work out of an office with a chiropractor, and they were able to adjust his jaw, because his jaw also got knocked out of place, for a mere $50, and it was done, and he didn't need x-rays, and my son was, totally fine, and he's like, wow, my jaw is so much better. And sure, it's stressful, and at the same time, I wouldn't trade working at a job that is, all-encompassing, that had full benefits, if it meant losing who I am and losing my relationship with my children. So yeah, it's indeed challenging at times, but it's so worth it to me to stay in integrity for self.
That's great. And also, I think, again, when you are in that higher frequency, I think once you have an intention or you ask for help, it does arrive, right? It again comes to what you ask for.
Exactly. And there's really this place of knowing that it's all going to be perfect, that I can drop into when I'm not panicking, and it's not always easy, but it's like things always work out for me. I just trust things always work out for me. And so if I can hold on to that little glimmer in spite of what's going on in that moment, then that often sustains me. And then sure enough, it's like, okay, this is all perfect. It worked out great.
Although I understand as a parent, it's never easy.
No, no, not and there's that part, where I'm sitting there looking at my son thinking, okay, is his mouth worth, $400? But it is what it is, and it's all perfect. And, so yes, very fun.
Thank you so much, Veronica. So grateful. And, our listeners, must be really grateful. Before we leave, I want to share Veronica's website, that's sacredofferings.com. And as you can see, she's so wise, and there was so much to read. I really am grateful for the sessions and